For decades, the pattern was familiar. Burkina Faso grew the cotton, mined the gold, and produced the raw materials. But too much of the higher value work happened somewhere else: the processing, the manufacturing, the branding, and the finished products that often returned at a higher price. Ibrahim Traoré is trying to change that equation. His government is pushing 9 strategic industrial value chains, taking full state control of the national cotton company, backing local processing, and protecting selected domestic industries, while Burkina Faso tries to build more of what it once had to buy from abroad. This is not Burkina Faso declaring war on France, America, or Europe. It is something more important. Burkina Faso is trying to become harder for any outside power to pressure. Imagine a country that processes more of its gold, weaves more of its cotton, produces more of its food, and builds more of its own industry. A country that sits across the table from Paris, Washington, Beijing, or anyone else with something it did not always have before: choices. Because the real revolution begins when saying no is backed by the ability to build yes at home. Walk into a cotton field in Burkina Faso, and the first part of the story belongs entirely to Burkina Faso. The soil is here. The farmer is here. The work is here. The cotton is grown here. But the moment that cotton leaves the field, a bigger question begins. Who creates the value after that? A bale of cotton is not a shirt. Between the field and the finished product are ginning, spinning, weaving, design, machinery, transport, finance, packaging, distribution, and jobs. That gap is where the struggle over economic value really begins. The problem is not trade itself. The problem is remaining trapped at the beginning of the chain. Burkina Faso can own a resource and still depend on other countries for the capabilities that turn that resource into something more valuable. Cotton is one example. Shea rice, mangoes, tomatoes, maize, and soybeans tell versions of the same story. That is why the current industrial strategy matters. Burkina Faso has identified 9 strategic value chains where it wants more transformation to happen at home. The objective is not simply to produce more raw material. It is to create more jobs, substitute some imports, and keep more economic activity inside the country. Now imagine what that means beyond a government document. A truck carrying Burkinabe cotton does not move only toward an export route. Some of it goes to a local spinning operation. Thread becomes fabric. Fabric becomes clothing. A technician maintains the machine. Another worker operates the line. A transport company moves the product. A local business sells it. Each additional step creates something the country did not have before. Capability. That is the real target. Economic sovereignty is not created simply by owning what lies underground or growing what comes out of the soil. It comes from knowing how to do more with it. That kind of independence cannot be declared in one speech. It has to be built skill by skill, factory by factory, product by product. 9 industries can look like nothing more than a list. Maize, rice, shea, cashew, sesame, tomatoes, mangoes, cotton, textiles, and clothing. Soybeans. But look at them another way. They are 9 places where Burkina Faso is asking the same question. How much of this value can we keep at home? Take mangoes. Growing the fruit is one step. Cleaning it, drying it, processing it, packaging it, and selling a finished product are different steps. Each requires equipment, energy, skills, workers, and businesses. The same logic applies to shea tomatoes, soybeans, rice, and cotton. In 2026, Burkina Faso placed these 9 value chains at the center of its industrial offensive because of their potential to create wealth and jobs, increase local processing, and replace part of what the country imports. That last idea changes the story. Import substitution means asking a simple question every time a container enters Burkina Faso. Could some of what is inside eventually be produced here? Not tomorrow, not everything, but more than today. If that strategy works, more of those products could one day be processed and packaged inside Burkina Faso, rather than leaving the country at the first stage of the value chain. Dependence is rarely dramatic. It often looks normal. A factory needs a component it cannot make. A farmer needs imported equipment. A supermarket depends on processed food from somewhere else. A country exports something simple and buys something more complicated back. One transaction means little. thousands begin defining what a country can and cannot do for itself. Traore's industrial bet is that Burkina Faso can slowly change that balance by moving further along selected chains. Grow the maize, then mill more of it. Grow the tomato, then process more of it. Grow the cotton, then spin it, weave it, and turn more of it into clothing. But there is a problem. The old system already has scale factories, financing, and established supply chains. Imported products can often arrive faster, cheaper, and in larger quantities than a young domestic industry can manage. So what happens when local industry is not yet strong enough to defend itself? Cotton would become one of the clearest tests. Cotton looks simple while it is still in the field. A farmer, a harvest, a truck. But once that cotton begins moving through an economy, it becomes a question of who controls the chain and who captures the value. In April 2026, Burkina Faso moved to make the state the sole shareholder of Sofitex, the country's major cotton company. The official explanation focused on financial and operational pressures, including debt-rising costs and delays in paying producers. But the decision also raised a larger question. Control it for what? Owning a cotton company does not automatically create economic independence. A country can control the crop and still depend on foreign machinery, spare parts, textile equipment, financing, buyers, and factories that capture the next stages of the value chain. So Sofitex is not the end of the story, it is the beginning of a staircase. At the bottom is raw cotton, then ginning, then spinning, then weaving, then fabric finishing, then clothing manufacturing, then design, distribution, and brands. Every step Burkina Faso climbs means more skills are developed at home, more machines are operated at home, more workers are trained at home, and more value stays inside the country. That is the difference between possessing cotton and possessing a cotton industry. Wealthy economies understand this clearly. Industrial power does not come only from the resource. It comes from the layers built after the resource is harvested. So why should Burkina Faso accept that its role must end at the field level? That is the difference between possessing cotton and building a cotton industry. Each new step creates more local skill, employment, and value. But the dream immediately meets reality. Factories cost money, electricity must be reliable, workers must be trained, production must reach enough scale to compete. Imported products may already be cheaper and easier to obtain. A young domestic industry can be overwhelmed before it becomes strong enough to stand alone. So if Burkina Faso wants to build more of the cotton industry at home, it has to answer another question. How do you protect a young industry while it is still learning to compete? That question leads directly to the real import fight. You may have heard a more dramatic story that Ibrahim Traoré suddenly imposed 30, 40, or 50% tariffs on everything coming from the West. The evidence does not support that claim. But Burkina Faso is doing something real, and in some ways it tells us more about the strategy. Instead of closing the entire country to foreign goods, the government has been protecting selected areas where it wants domestic capacity to grow. The IMF's 2026 review records import quotas covering locally manufactured products and a ban on imported weaving yarns and woven loincloths, alongside other restrictions designed to support local industry. Burkinabe authorities also confirmed that the textile ban remained in force and reported seizing non-compliant imported goods. The message is not that every import is an enemy. The message is that Burkina Faso is beginning to ask a strategic question. What should we continue buying from abroad, and what should we start learning to produce for ourselves? That distinction matters. Self-reliance does not mean making every foreign product disappear. It means reducing the number of cases where foreign supply is the only possible answer. Imagine two futures. In the first, Burkina Faso grows cotton, foreign factories transform it, imported textiles dominate the market, and local producers remain too small to compete. In the second, protection gives domestic producers time. Spinning expands, weaving expands, technicians gain experience, production improves, costs begin to fall, quality begins to rise. Eventually, the local industry becomes strong enough that permanent protection is no longer the goal. That is the real test. Protection is not victory. It is time. And time only matters if Burkina Faso uses it to build capability. A ban cannot manufacture cloth. A quota cannot train an engineer. A customs officer cannot create industrial productivity. At some point, the factory has to become strong enough. This is why the strategy is more serious than a dramatic tariff headline. Restrictions can be changed or removed. Governments can change. But once a country has trained technicians, built suppliers, developed maintenance knowledge, and learned how to produce something itself, that capability is harder to take away. The strongest challenge to dependence is not a wall against imports. It is an alternative to them. And that means the next battlefield is not the border. It is the factory floor. A tariff cannot weave fabric. A ban cannot process a mango. A speech cannot turn maize into flour. And patriotism alone cannot manufacture a machine. Eventually, if Burkina Faso wants to reduce dependence, somebody has to build a factory, a workshop, a processing line, a warehouse, a maintenance team, a generation of people who know how the machines work. That is where the real confrontation begins. In December 2025, Ibrahim Traoré inaugurated Burkina Faso, a cashew processing factory in Bobo Dioulasso. The project was privately promoted with government support, but its importance fits the broader national strategy. Instead of allowing another agricultural product to leave with most of its potential value unrealized, process more of it at home. The same logic is appearing across food processing and other industrial projects. At first, Burkina Faso may import the machine. Then workers learn to operate, maintain, repair, and eventually assemble more of it locally. That is how capability grows. Import it, operate it, maintain it, repair it, assemble more of it, make more of it. Each step removes one small vulnerability. Imagine a food processing line in Bobo Dioulasso 10 years from now. The machine stops. Instead of waiting weeks for a foreign technician or a part from thousands of kilometers away, a Burkinabe technician diagnoses the problem, a local workshop produces the replacement, and the line starts again. That moment may never become a political headline, but that is self-reliance in practical form. A factory does more than make a product. It teaches. It creates technicians, suppliers, maintenance knowledge, transport demand, packaging businesses, and engineering experience. Once that knowledge exists inside a country, it becomes much harder to remove. But hope still has to meet reality. Factories need electricity, financing replacement parts, skilled workers, roads, customers, and enough production volume to compete. Burkina Faso cannot jump from importing complex machinery today to manufacturing everything tomorrow. The realistic path is a staircase. Operate, repair, assemble, manufacture more components, then climb again. The destination is not a Burkina Faso that never buys anything from France, America, Europe, China, India, or anyone else. It is a Burkina Faso with a much longer list of things it can do without asking anyone. When a country has no alternative, the supplier has leverage. When it has several suppliers, it gains choice. And when it can produce something itself, the relationship changes again. That is why the real weapon in this economic confrontation is not anger. It is capability. And there is one resource where the difference between owning something and controlling its value is impossible to ignore. Gold. Gold makes the contradiction harder to ignore. Burkina Faso is a major gold-producing country, and gold is its most important export. But owning gold beneath the ground is not the same thing as controlling the economic power created around that gold. Think about the chain. Someone finances the mine, someone owns or operates the equipment, someone extracts and processes the ore, someone refines the gold, someone certifies it, finances the transaction, and sells it into international markets. The gold begins in Burkina Faso, but the economic chain can stretch far beyond Burkina Faso. Traore's government is trying to pull more of that chain back home. In November 2023, Traore laid the foundation stone for a gold refinery project in Ouagadougou. Burkina Faso also expanded the role of its state mining company. By 2025, the state had taken control of the Boungou and Wagnion industrial gold mines. In July 2026, the government created Bouboulou SA, presented by the presidency as a fully state-owned industrial gold mine. One mine does not create economic independence. One refinery project does not end foreign involvement. But together these moves reveal a direction. Control more, process more, keep more value, build more expertise at home. The real question is not whether Burkina Faso should stop selling gold to France, Switzerland, China, or anyone else. It is how much of the economic chain Burkina Faso can control before the gold leaves. Now imagine where that road could lead. Burkinabe geologists help identify the resource. Engineers work inside the mine. Domestic companies supply more services. Local technicians maintain more machinery. More processing happens inside the country. Expertise grows around metallurgy, certification logistics, and finance. Burkina Faso has already shown a smaller example of this philosophy. In January 2024, Traore launched operations at Golden Hand SA, a mining residue treatment facility. The presidency said the equipment used there had been designed by Burkinabe artisans. That is not the same as refining the country's entire gold output. But the principle matters. Local expertise solving a local industrial problem. Every additional technical step performed at home reduces one piece of dependence. Still, control cannot be confused with success. A state-owned mine can be badly managed. A refinery can struggle to become competitive. Equipment can fail. Power can be unreliable. Corruption can destroy value under domestic control just as easily as under foreign control. So the test is not whether Burkina Faso places its flag over more mines. The test is whether greater control produces greater capability, more skilled employment, stronger public revenue, and more value retained inside the country. If that happens, gold becomes more than something Burkina Faso possesses. It becomes something Burkina Faso increasingly knows how to use. And that leads to the hardest question of the entire project. Can Burkina Faso reduce dependence on France, America, and the wider West without cutting itself off from the technology capital and markets it still needs? The answer begins with an uncomfortable fact. Burkina Faso is not economically independent today. It still operates inside an international economy. It imports petroleum products and fertilizers. It uses foreign technology and external financing. In June 2026, it was still operating under an IMF-supported program with new external pressure coming partly from energy and fertilizer shocks. That reality does not destroy the self-reliance story. It defines the distance still to travel. If a farm depends on imported fertilizer, that is a vulnerability. If a factory stops because one foreign component cannot arrive, that is a vulnerability. If losing one foreign partner can stop an essential part of the economy, that partner still has leverage. So the real objective should not be a Burkina Faso that needs nobody. It should be a Burkina Faso where nobody becomes indispensable. That changes the meaning of sovereignty. If France says no, Burkina Faso has another supplier. If America says no, it has another market. If China changes its terms, Burkina Faso has alternatives. If one foreign company leaves, domestic engineers know enough to keep more of the system running. And eventually, in some sectors, the alternative is not another foreign supplier at all. It is a capability already built at home. Imagine a future negotiating table. Across from Burkina Faso could be Paris, Washington, Beijing, New Delhi, Moscow, or any other capital. But Burkina Faso is no longer asking, what will you allow us to do? It is asking, what are you offering us? And is there a better option? That is leverage. A country that produces more food, processes more resources, maintains more of its own machinery, and has several financing and trading options, negotiates from a stronger position. But there is another danger. Replacing one indispensable partner with another is not self-reliance. If dependence on France falls, but complete dependence on China for machinery takes its place, the underlying problem remains. The strongest version of the strategy must therefore be simple: more choices outside, more capability inside. Foreign investment can still be useful. Imported technology can still be useful. European, American, Chinese, Indian, Russian, Turkish, African, and other partnerships can all have a place. But partnership should increasingly become something Burkina Faso chooses because it serves national goals, not something it accepts because there is no alternative. Traore does not need France to collapse. He does not need America to become weaker. Burkina Faso needs to become stronger. Strong enough to produce more repair, more process, more feed, more of itself, and diversify its partners. That future is not yet proven. So the next question is simple. How will we know if it is actually happening? The answer is not a speech. It is a scoreboard. Walk into a market. How many products on the shelves were actually made in Burkina Faso? Walk into a cotton operation. How much cotton becomes thread fabric and clothing before it leaves the country? Visit a food processing plant. How much maize, rice, tomatoes, mangoes, soybeans, or cashews are being transformed into higher value products at home? Go to a mine. How much expertise, processing, maintenance management, and technical knowledge remains inside Burkina Faso after the gold is extracted? Then visit a workshop. When a machine breaks, how much of the solution can be found locally? That is the scoreboard. Local production, local processing, industrial jobs, technical skills, reliable energy, domestic suppliers, import substitution. More value created before a product crosses the border. A country can nationalize a company and still depend heavily on foreign technology. It can open a factory and still import nearly every important component. It can speak about industrial sovereignty while factories struggle with electricity, financing, maintenance, or scale. So the test has to be ruthless. Did domestic capacity actually increase? Did workers acquire new skills? Did production rise? Did the country replace something it previously had little choice but to import it? Did more value remain inside Burkina Faso? If the answer is no, rhetoric moved faster than the economy. But if the answer becomes yes year after year, then the balance begins to change. France does not lose leverage because Traore gives a speech. America does not lose leverage because Burkina Faso talks about sovereignty. China does not lose leverage because Burkina Faso changes partners. Outside leverage falls when Burkina Faso has alternatives. A local product, a second supplier, a trained engineer, a functioning factory, a reliable energy source, a domestic processor. One alternative becomes two become five, and eventually, dependence stops looking permanent. That raises the final question. What would Burkina Faso look like if this experiment actually succeeds? Imagine Burkina Faso in the mid-2030s. Not a country isolated from the world, but a country standing on stronger economic foundations. A farmer sees more than a harvest. Maize moves into domestic milling and food processing. Tomatoes and mangoes move toward local processing plants. Cotton continues into spinning, weaving, and clothing. Gold passes through more Burkinabe-controlled stages before entering international markets. Around those industries grows something even more valuable. Knowledge. Technicians, engineers, mechanics, managers, suppliers, young businesses, people who know how to keep the system running. A machine breaks in a factory. The first call is no longer automatically to Paris, Beijing, or somewhere thousands of kilometers away. A Burkinabe technician opens the machine. A local workshop has the part. Production starts again. Burkina Faso still trades with the world, but more products on its shelves are grown, processed, packaged, and manufactured at home because they can compete. Then comes the political consequence. France offers a deal. Burkina Faso can negotiate. America offers a partnership. Burkina Faso can negotiate. China offers financing. Burkina Faso can compare the terms. India offers machinery. Burkina Faso has options. Nobody has to disappear. Nobody has to become the enemy. But nobody gets to become indispensable. That is the future self-reliance makes possible. Not a country standing alone. A country standing on its own feet while choosing who it stands beside. If Burkina Faso ever reaches that point, the significance will extend beyond its borders. Because the most important idea Traore may be challenging is not France, America, or even the West. It is the belief that Burkina Faso must always remain dependent on somebody else. If that belief disappears, the country will have begun to believe that its future can be built at home. Burkina Faso does not need to defeat France. It does not need America, China, Russia, India, or anyone else to disappear. It needs something more important, the ability to choose. To choose who it trades with, who it accepts investment from, how much value is created before its resources leave, and which capabilities it will build at home. That is the real confrontation of the Traore era, not Burkina Faso against the world. Burkina Faso against dependence. The dream is a country that grows more processes, more builds, more repairs, more trains, more, and keeps more of the value created by its own land and its own people. If Burkina Faso can build that future, sovereignty will exist not only on a flag, but inside farms, factories, workshops, power systems, and the choices the country is able to make. Which capabilities should come first, food energy manufacturing, cotton or gold processing? Tell me where you are watching from and why. Because a nation truly begins to control its future when nobody else becomes indispensable. Disclaimer, this video is fictional storytelling created for education, commentary, and entertainment. It is not a factual report or official information. Any similarities to real events are coincidental. Please enjoy it as creative content only.